Well, thank you so much for joining us on this adventure today. I hope you know the theme is adventure, otherwise you probably wouldn't be here. So I get to open up today and start the presentations. And so I want to talk just about adventure, what adventure is. It's something that I'm particularly passionate about, and I hope that you are as well. So what do you think about when you think about the word adventure? What comes to mind? Maybe a lion hunt. Or maybe what comes to mind for me is this tall guy. I don't know why he's tall, but he's a tall guy walking through a jungle. It's a foreign jungle. No one even knows where this thing is. It's probably in the Amazon. He's carrying a machete. He has a hat on, one of those canvas hats. Probably looks like Indiana Jones. Sun-drenched, sweat dripping all over. Other than that, no sun protection because the guy's living risky. He has a machete. He's holding off ferocious animals. And then about 20 feet behind him is this group of scientists all huddled together, holding their rifles, hoping for the best, hoping they don't get eaten by that lion. Next, I think about mountains. I don't know why, snow-capped mountains, and I think about vast oceans and deep seas, space. I think about those frontiers that are unconquered by man today. Next come the names. I think about Cook, Magellan, Amundsen, Shackleton, people I've heard about in my history books somewhere, in a class somewhere. I know that they're great adventurers, but I'm not exactly sure what it is that they've done. Then I think about the whole adventure industry today in the modern times. I think about skydiving and whitewater rafting, maybe extreme sports, things that are really underpinned with fraught danger and risk, and you hear about people doing it and it costs a lot of money, but every once in a while you'll go on one of those adventures. I think adventure, just loosely defined, is anything new or unexpected. It might be risky, it might be bold, it just might be something that you've never done before. To me, adventure is really closely tied with exploration. It's about exploring the unknown. It's something it's contagious. It's something that's participatory. It's something that is not entertainment. It's not watching TV. It's something about actually getting out there and doing it. And so that's what I want to talk about today, is adventure. I want to kick the day off and talk about adventure. And I want to do that by sharing a story that's about 100 years old now, about one of the greatest adventures, in my opinion, of all time. It's a polar expedition. And it happened in 1914. But before we get to that, I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about what it's like to be a kid. This is a picture of my two kids, Asher and Kai. They're ridiculously adorable. You can tell me that, it's okay. And what's amazing about these guys is that every day is an adventure to them. I take them to the park pretty regularly, and before I can even open up the door, they're pretty much in a full-on sprint heading for the playground equipment. They're climbing all over it, and really they have no concern at all for the risk that they're really taking on upon themselves. And ultimately, we end up in the hospital quite a bit because they're boys. That's what they do. And I love it. And I think, they just want to live life to the fullest. They just want to experience life. And then I think about adults, and I think about myself, and I think about how we're taught to manage risk. If you have a job and a career that's even slightly risky, it's all about managing risk and safety. And ultimately, what that means for a lot of people, unfortunately, is that we should decrease risk at all costs. And really, as adults, we know from research that we're really, really bad at assessing risk in general. Driving down the highway, we're in a car. We feel like we're in control of the situation, so we underestimate that risk. But if we're in a situation with less control, like skydiving or even flying for some people, we overestimate the risk. We're holding on to those seats so tight, hoping that the plane doesn't crash. And in the end, it doesn't. Everything is fine. And so my kids teach me so much about risk and about exploration and about adventure. And I wonder what would happen if we were to remove those artificial limitations that we set upon ourselves because we think things are too risky. And we kind of got back to that spirit of adventure that my two boys have. So what do you see here? Who sees a box? All right, you guys are smart. I love it. So you're probably like, hey, honey, you forgot to tell me we're moving. Or, yes, my microwave finally showed up. I'm so excited. Well, I'll tell you what, my boys, when they see a cardboard box, they see this. They see a castle. And right behind the castle is this dragon that's just coming right out. And we'll play for hours pretending this is a castle and dragons. Or my kids think that it's a spaceship and we're flying to the stars or a plane. My kids see this box, and they know they have permission to use their imagination to go on an adventure. They don't have to travel around the world or pay hundreds of dollars to go whitewater rafting. They can just have an adventure right there. And I think there's an insight there that's really important for all of us as adults, as people who have jobs and mortgages and relationships and responsibilities, is that sometimes adventures, the starting point is just having permission to go on an adventure. And so when I talk about exploration, I like to talk about participatory exploration, because I don't think exploration is enough. I think it has to be participatory. And if you think about human space exploration, for example, human space exploration is a great example of exploration that's not very participatory. There's thousands of people on the ground that support a select few astronauts who get to fly into space. But for the vast majority of people, exploration is something that you never get to participate in yourself. It's something that somebody else gets to do. So one of my favorite explorers is a guy named Ernest Shackleton. Who has heard of Ernest Shackleton before? All right, a pretty good amount. You know, I was surprised that I had never heard of Ernest Shackleton before. Ernest Shackleton was a British explorer. He lived from 1874 to 1922, and he went on 3 expeditions to the South Pole, or to Antarctica, from Britain. He's an amazing guy. And you might have heard of him, like I have, maybe, because there's a crater on the moon named after him. In 2004, I was working at NASA, and we were developing lunar architectures and rovers and spacesuits to go back to the moon. And everyone kept talking about Shackleton Crater. We're gonna build a base at Shackleton Crater. It's the greatest place to build a base. And I thought, well, who's Shackleton? And so I started looking into the story of Ernest Shackleton. It turns out the guy is amazing. First of all, Ernest Shackleton lived at a time where it's very different than the world we live in today. If you looked at the pages of Encyclopedia Britannica, who even reads that anymore, but Encyclopedia Britannica back then, you would see pages and pages of polar exploration. Explorers like Amundsen had just conquered the South Pole. They made it there. They sprinted back. But if you looked at Antarctica, all you saw was a big hole, because nobody knew what was in that void, in that gap. And so Shackleton set out in 1914 to discover that. He wanted to go from sea to sea across the Antarctic continent through the South Pole and discover what was going on. And the guy was one tough dude. If you take a look at this picture, you're just kind of like, wow, this guy is really, really a tough guy. And his story is really a true tale of the risks and rewards of adventure and exploration, and really participatory exploration, because what he did was he knew he couldn't do it himself. He needed a crew to go with him. So he chose 26 people to join him. And it's kind of a famous story, because he put out this ad. It said, "Men wanted for hazardous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long hours of complete darkness, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in the event of success." My wife tells me this is what it's like being a stay-at-home mom. And when I was coming from Texas to Winnipeg, someone was like, "I think that's what Winnipeg's like." But ultimately, Ernest Shackleton put out this call for participants in his expedition. Over 5,000 people applied. They showed up at 4 Burlington Street in London, knocked on the door and said, "I'm your man," or woman, in the case of 3 sporty women who said, if it would be inconvenient that I wear my feminine clothes, I would be happy to don masculine attire. Unfortunately, they were not selected, but Shackleton did select 26 men. And this isn't a Hollywood cast of reality TV stars where we get everyone in a room and we have artificial conversations about things that really don't matter. This is a story about 26 people who just came from Cambridge in their studies. They were rookies. This is about people who are sailors and knew everything you would need to know on the water, but as soon as they got onto land, they had no idea what was going on. And so this is the crew. It ended up being 27 crew plus Shackleton 28, because an 18-year-old stowed away on the ship and joined the adventure, even though Shackleton didn't give him permission. He gave himself permission. And people were paid £240 a year if you're a sailor, $750 a year, although Shackleton considered it enough just to join in the passage. So in 1914, in this world, it's very different than today. There's no communication technology, no internet. They went to Buenos Aires, then they went to South Georgia and departed for the Weddell Sea. All was going well until about a month into the mission, they got trapped by ice. The ship became really kind of encrusted in this ice. And it was a really bad situation. Unfortunately, it got worse. The Endurance, which is what the ship was called, the name for the ship, was soon crushed and sank. The crew had to unload everything off of that ship and build makeshift tents and use the 3 life support boats that they had to stay alive. And it was not a good situation. If you've ever been in this situation, who's been stuck in Antarctica? Nobody? I can promise you it's not a good situation. The crew survived for 9 months. No heat, no shelter, no internet. I have no idea how they did it, but they did it. They had 69 dogs with them. At the end of it, there weren't 69 dogs anymore. They were a tough group of people. And Shackleton, at this point, said, no ship, no stores, time to go home. He's a smart, practical guy. He set out to set a spirit of adventure, a spirit of exploration for his crew, not only to inspire them, but to inspire himself, because how are you going to get yourself off of Antarctica? You just lost your ship. So when the ice thawed, about 4 months after that, the crew hastily abandoned all the non-essentials, and everybody piled into these 3 lifeboats, and they set out. They're like, they have no other choice. After a 7-day voyage, 100 miles, they made it to this island, Elephant Island. It was a desolate place. Nobody lived there. Whalers didn't go there. It wasn't by any shipping routes. It was the worst possible place ever to be rescued. But it was amazing they even made it, because this is one of the worst oceans in the world. Hurricane force winds, it's a bad deal. It was the first time they had set foot on land in 497 days. 497 days. It's incredible. Just think about how you would sustain yourself on an ice cube for 497 days. Elephant Island was a seriously inhospitable place, so they knew that they needed to move. So Shackleton, before the next winter set in just a few days later, fetched for help. He took 5 people with him, took the largest lifeboat, which was 32 feet long, and departed on the last day before the ice pack closed in again. It's ridiculous. The whole story is ridiculous. The journey, this part of the journey, involved crossing 800 miles of open water in a 32-foot boat in hurricane condition winds. The navigator had to look up at the stars and the sun only when the clouds broke really just a few times to find out where to go. It was really pinpoint accuracy was required to get there, and somehow 14 days later they did it. They saw land in 14 days, but it took them 2 more days to get onto the shore because the waves were so harsh. There was reefs, there was rocks. It's a really bad deal. Somehow they made it. They had this feeling when they got to this point of this detached resentment that nobody would ever know that they made it across 800 miles of ocean in hurricane conditions. They would think it would be just as good as if they died at the beginning of their mission as at the end. And some consider this the greatest small boat journey in the world. But unfortunately for Shackleton, the story's not over. Help was now only 20 miles away at whaling stations, but unfortunately, they landed on the wrong side of the island. And what stood between them was a mountain range of black peaks and glaciers. No one had ever traversed this before. So against incredible odds, and on the only moonlit night before bad weather closed in again, Shackleton made it to the whaling station, traversed down a waterfall, and found help. No one has ever beat Shackleton's record over these mountains yet. He had no equipment. They were starved. They were malnutritioned. It's an incredible story. It took Shackleton 4 more attempts, the first 3 failed, to rescue his crew, including this guy, the expedition photographer, Frank Hurley. All these photos, 120 of them, are images that came directly out of the Shackleton expedition, including this one, which is the most famous one. It's the ghost image. 120 photographs of people doing the impossible. Unfortunately for Shackleton, his expedition failed, but the adventure didn't. It goes down as one of the most heroic adventures of all time. Someone later wrote on the Terra Nova mission, they said, for a joint scientific and geographical piece of organization, give me Scott. For a winter journey, Wilson. For a dash to the pole, nothing else, Amundsen. And if I'm in the evil of a hole and want to get out of it, give me Shackleton every time. It's a great story. It's a story about people doing the impossible. And this is what adventure is really all about. So the moral of the story, don't get stuck in Antarctica. Good advice, not where I'm going. Exploration isn't easy. Exploration is no less risky today than it was 100 years ago from today. Although Everest has been conquered more times than we can count, and the Sahara Desert's been paved over with roads, and jungles have been chopped down, and we can open our computers and look at every crevice and corner and nook and cranny of the world, it doesn't mean that the art of adventure is done. The thirst for adventure doesn't come from just discovering new frontiers. It actually comes from not outside of man, but from within. It comes from understanding our own limits and our own endurance and pushing ourselves beyond what we think is possible. That's what adventure is all about. I think you'd agree with me. The greatest risk is not to explore at all. So many of us live a safe, comfortable, conservative life. We kind of set out for happiness and for a peace of mind. And I promise you, the worst thing you can do to kill your adventurous spirit that you have as a child is to not explore at all, not to set out, and to live in a very secure future. So there's a lot of lessons learned. Shackleton is often quoted in leadership seminars. You'll hear people say, well, he conquered this difficult situation, overcome adversity. He supported the men underneath him. But I think the most important lessons we can learn from him are the things he once told somebody who asked about what it's like to be a polar explorer. He said, first, you have to have optimism. Second, you have to have patience, because whatever your expedition is, it probably won't go right. Third, you need to have creativity, because when it doesn't go right, you need to get out of it. And finally, you need to have courage. And he felt that every man and woman had courage. You just need to find it. He said this: we were the fools who could not rest. On the dull earth we left behind, burdened with our passion for the south and drink strange frenzy from the wind. The world where wise men sit at ease from our unregretful eyes, and thus across uncharted seas we stagger on our enterprise. And I think it's a really interesting insight into what adventure is. So here's my challenge. I challenge you to go on one adventure every month for the next year. Write it down, and then tell us about where it is. You don't have to buy a boat and sail to the seas. You don't have to go to space. All I encourage you to do is step out, take a risk, go outside your comfort zone, and try something out, and then tell other people around. Today you're going to hear from some fantastic speakers. I encourage you to use this as inspiration for where your adventures over the next year will take you. Finally, I end the talk with a quote from my favorite philosopher, Mark Twain. 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones that you did. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from safe harbor, catch the trade wind in your sails, explore, dream, and discover. Thanks.